Marcus Webb sat in his small apartment, staring at the screen of his old data pad. His fingers scrolled through listings he'd looked at 100 times before. Then he saw it. Abandoned alien structure, remote location, no neighbors guaranteed. He read the words 3 times. This was it. This was exactly what he needed. At 67 years old, Marcus had lived a good life. He'd worked hard, fixed things, made an honest living as a mechanic. But now the doctors had given him 6 months. Maybe less. The cancer in his lungs was winning, and Marcus was tired of fighting. More than that, he was tired of the looks people gave him. The pity in their eyes. The awkward silences. He didn't want to spend his final days in some sterile hospital room with nurses pretending everything would be fine. He wanted peace. He wanted quiet. He wanted to die on his own terms. The listing showed pictures of some kind of alien building on a distant moon. It looked ancient and beautiful in a strange way. The price was cheap too. Probably because nobody in their right mind would want to die alone on a dead rock floating in space. Marcus called the number. A cheerful voice answered. "Hello, this is Jenny with Frontier Real Estate. How can I help you today?" "I'm calling about the property on Kepler 442c's moon," Marcus said. His voice was rough, worn down by years and sickness. There was a pause. "Oh, that one. Sir, I have to be honest with you. That location is extremely remote. There are no medical facilities, no supply stations, no neighbors for hundreds of thousands of miles. If something goes wrong out there, nobody can help you." Marcus coughed, tasting the familiar copper tang in his mouth. "Ma'am, that's exactly why I'm calling. When can I move in?" Jenny tried for another 20 minutes to talk him out of it. She explained the risks, the isolation, the fact that the building hadn't been maintained in 2 centuries. But Marcus had made up his mind. By the end of the call, he'd signed the digital contract and transferred his life savings. It wasn't much, but it was enough. 3 weeks later, Marcus piloted his small shuttle toward Kepler 442c's moon. The journey took days, and every hour took him farther from Earth, farther from humanity, farther from everything he'd ever known. He didn't mind. He watched the stars slip by his window and felt something like peace settling into his bones. When the moon came into view, Marcus pressed his face against the cold glass. The surface was gray and cratered, dead as promised. But rising from the barren landscape was something magnificent. The alien base jutted up from crystalline rock formations, its walls catching the distant starlight and throwing it back in soft colors. It looked like a cathedral made of glass and metal, frozen in time. Marcus landed his shuttle near the main entrance. The airlock was old but functional. When he stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The interior was massive. Corridors stretched in every direction, their walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. The architecture was unlike anything human. The Vern who'd built this place had been gone for 200 years, wiped out by some long-forgotten war. But their work remained, beautiful and haunting. Marcus explored slowly, his boots echoing on smooth floors. He found what looked like living quarters in the East Wing. The room was large, with a ceiling that curved overhead like the inside of a shell. The walls glowed faintly, pulsing with some kind of bioluminescent material. He couldn't read the symbols carved into the surfaces, but they felt important somehow, like prayers or poems. He set up his simple cot in the corner. It looked pathetic in that grand space, but Marcus didn't care. He unpacked his few belongings. Some clothes, a few photos from his life on Earth, and his tools. The tools were old friends, their handles worn smooth from decades of use. He lined them up carefully on the floor beside his cot. That first night, Marcus lay on his back and stared at the glowing ceiling. He could hear the bass around him, strange creaks and hums that might have been unsettling anywhere else. But here, in this place built by hands that were no longer alive, surrounded by a silence deeper than anything on Earth, Marcus felt calm. For the first time in months he wasn't afraid. The pain in his chest was still there, constant and heavy. But out here it didn't matter as much. There was no one to worry about him. No one to disappoint. No one to watch him waste away. He closed his eyes and slept deeper than he had in years. The next morning, Marcus woke with sunlight streaming through a window he hadn't noticed before. He made himself coffee using his small travel kit, the smell familiar and comforting. Then he started exploring more of the base. By the second week, something interesting happened. Marcus noticed the lights were flickering in several corridors. Power conduits were failing, their alien technology finally giving out after 2 centuries of neglect. He found himself standing in front of a malfunctioning panel, studying it with the same focus he'd given to broken engines and faulty wiring his whole life. His hands moved before his brain caught up. He couldn't help it. 40 years as a mechanic had trained his body to fix broken things automatically. It was who he was, even now, even dying. Marcus went back to his shuttle and grabbed his toolbox. He knew he shouldn't care. He was here to die, not to play repairman. But watching those lights flicker bothered him. It felt wrong to let things stay broken when he could fix them. He worked slowly, his breathing labored. The alien technology was strange, completely different from anything he'd worked on before. But broken was broken in any language. He traced power flows, identified failed components, and improvised solutions using parts from his shuttle and pieces of the alien machinery scattered around the base. After 2 days of work, he jury-rigged a cooling unit for the main power system. He used copper wiring from his shuttle, some kind of crystal component from the alien tech, and a lot of hope. When he activated it, the unit hummed to life. The flickering lights steadied. The base seemed to breathe easier, its systems running smoother. Marcus sat back on his heels and smiled. His chest hurt and he was exhausted, but he felt good. Useful. Alive. Even dying, even millions of miles from home, he was still fixing things. It was who he was. It was all he knew how to be. And for now, that was enough. Thomas Webb had been alone on the moon for 3 weeks. He'd fallen into a comfortable routine. Wake up, make coffee, tinker with the base's systems, eat a simple meal, sleep. The silence had become his friend. The loneliness didn't bother him anymore. He was at peace. Then, on the 23rd night, everything changed. Thomas woke to the sound of humming. Not the usual mechanical hum of the base's life support systems. This was different. Deeper. Like the building itself was waking up from a long sleep. He sat up on his cot, his heart pounding in his chest. The pain there reminded him he was still alive, still dying, but very much present in this moment. Lights began flickering on in corridors he'd never seen illuminate before. They were far away, deep in sections of the base he hadn't explored yet. Thomas had assumed those areas were dead, their power systems long failed. But now they glowed with a soft, pulsing light that seemed almost alive. He grabbed his plasma torch from beside his cot. His hands shook slightly as he stood. Part of him wondered if this was it, if his mind was finally going from the medication or the isolation. Maybe he was hallucinating. But the sounds were too real. The lights were too bright. Thomas moved slowly through the corridors, following the new lights deeper into the base. His breath came hard and painful. His step felt heavy. But curiosity pushed him forward. In his old life, he'd always been the type to investigate strange noises, to figure out what was broken. That instinct hadn't left him even now. The sounds grew louder. Footsteps. Something was moving in the darkness ahead. Thomas rounded a corner and froze. His plasma torch slipped from his fingers, clattering on the metal floor. There, standing in the middle of the corridor, was something he'd thought impossible. An alien. A real, living alien. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body thin and elegant in a way that seemed fragile. Her skin looked like frosted glass, covered in patterns that reminded Thomas of ice crystals on a winter window. But the crystals were dim, their light faded like old stars. She had 3 eyes, arranged in a triangle on her face, and they fixed on Thomas with an expression he recognized immediately. Anger. The alien's mouth moved, and a device on her chest crackled to life. The voice that came out was choppy and mechanical, struggling with words. You, a human? What are you doing in this place? Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. He should have been terrified. He should have run. But he was too tired, too sick, too close to death to feel fear anymore. Instead, he felt something else. Curiosity. And maybe a little guilt. I'm sorry, he said slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. I didn't know anyone was here. The listing said this place was abandoned. Abandoned? The alien's voice rose, her translator struggling to keep up with her emotion. This is not abandoned. This is sacred. This is a sanctuary. I am Keeper Lyra, last of the Vern people, and you have invaded my home. Thomas looked at her carefully. She was angry, yes, but she was also swaying slightly on her feet. She looked exhausted. Ancient. Like she'd been carrying a weight for far too long. Last of your people? Thomas asked quietly. Lyra's crystalline features shifted into what might have been sadness. Yes. The Vern are no more. All gone. 200 years I have been alone, waking from hibernation every few cycles to maintain this memorial. And now I wake to find a human trespassing in the tomb of my civilization. She said the word human like it tasted bad. Thomas understood her anger. He'd bought this place thinking it was abandoned, that no one would care if he came here to die. He'd been wrong. I'm truly sorry, he said again. I'll leave if you want. I came here because I'm dying. I have maybe 4 months left. I wanted somewhere quiet. Somewhere peaceful. I didn't mean to disturb you. Lyra stared at him with her 3 eyes. Her translator made a clicking sound as she processed his words. You are dying? I can see it now in your biology. Your systems are failing. Cancer, Thomas said simply. Lung cancer. Terminal. There was a long silence. Thomas could hear his own breathing, ragged and painful. He could hear the bass humming around them. And he could hear Lyra's breathing too, which sounded just as labored as his own. So, Lyra said finally, her voice softer now, you came here to die alone. To escape your people's pity. Something like that. Another silence. Then Lyra laughed. It was a strange sound like wind chimes breaking. We are both fools then. Both hiding in this place waiting for the end. Thomas didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he did something his mother had taught him long ago. When you don't know what to say, offer hospitality. Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make a cup. Lyra tilted her head, confused. Coffee? It's a human drink. Hot. Bitter. It helps with living. They walked back to Thomas's makeshift living area in awkward silence. Thomas made 2 cups of coffee using his small travel kit. The smell filled the alien space with something familiar and comforting. He handed 1 cup to Lyra, showing her how to hold it. Lyra took a careful sip. Her face immediately twisted in disgust. She made a sound like glass scraping against metal and set the cup down quickly. That is revolting. How do humans drink this poison? Thomas laughed despite himself. It was the first time he'd laughed in months. It's an acquired taste. Lyra's crystals brightened slightly, just for a moment. She sat down on the floor across from Thomas, her long limbs folding in ways that seemed impossible. You said you've been here 3 weeks? Yes. And in 3 weeks, you repaired the cooling system in the power distribution center. Thomas blinked. I fixed a few things, yeah. The lights were flickering. It bothered me. I'm a mechanic. Was a mechanic. It's just what I do. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. I have been trying to repair that system for 30 years. 30 years of waking from hibernation, working until exhaustion, failing, sleeping again. And you fixed it in days. I didn't know it was important. I just didn't like seeing things broken. Important. Lyra's voice cracked. That system keeps the memorial archive stable. It preserves the last records of my people's existence. Without it, everything my species ever was will eventually decay into nothing. She paused, her 3 eyes studying Thomas carefully. You saved their memory. Even if you didn't know it. Thomas didn't know what to say. He sipped his coffee, letting the bitter warmth fill his mouth. Outside the window, distant stars glittered in the darkness. Inside, 2 dying beings sat together in the ruins of a lost civilization. Finally, Lyra spoke again. Perhaps we can share this space. It is large enough for 2. Thomas nodded slowly. I'd like that. But you will ask permission before touching anything else. Fair enough. Lyra stood to leave, then paused. Thomas wept. You make a terrible trespasser. You apologize too much and fix things instead of stealing them. Thomas smiled. Sorry about that. Stop apologizing, Lyra said, but her tone was warmer now. Almost kind. She disappeared into the dark corridors, leaving Thomas alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them were. And somehow that made the dying a little easier. 2 weeks went by in near silence. Thomas saw Lyra only occasionally, glimpses of her tall figure moving through distant corridors like a ghost. She kept to her sections of the base and he kept to his. It was a quiet arrangement, respectful but lonely. Thomas went back to his routine of fixing small problems, always careful not to touch anything that seemed important or sacred. He was working on a power junction one afternoon, his tools spread around him on the floor, when a shadow fell across his workspace. Thomas looked up to find Lyra standing over him. Her crystalline skin caught the light from his work lamp, throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. The Eastern Wing, she said without greeting. The environmental controls are failing. The temperature regulation is unstable. Can you examine them? Thomas wiped his greasy hands on his pants. I thought you said I wasn't supposed to touch anything without permission. Lyra's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Thomas was starting to recognize as discomfort. I am revising that rule. She paused and her voice became quieter. I need help. I cannot fix it alone. Those words seemed to cost her something. Thomas understood. Pride was universal, it seemed, even among aliens. Asking for help was never easy. Show me, Thomas said, gathering his tools. The eastern wing was like walking into a completely different building. The corridors here were narrower, the walls covered in more of those strange symbols that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Lyra led him through a maze of passages that made Thomas's head spin. He tried to memorize the turns but gave up after the fifth or sixth twist. They entered a large chamber filled with technology that looked nothing like anything Thomas had ever seen. Crystalline structures grew from the walls like frozen trees. Conduits of light pulsed through transparent tubes. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. This, Lyra said, gesturing to a massive console in the center, controls the environmental systems for this entire section. Temperature, humidity, air composition. It has been failing for months. I have tried everything I know, but nothing works. Thomas approached the console carefully. He ran his scanner over it, getting readings that barely made sense. The technology was so advanced, so different from human engineering, that his tools struggled to understand it. But Thomas had learned long ago that all machines, no matter how complex, followed certain basic rules. Energy flowed from one place to another. Components connected in logical ways. When something broke, there was always a reason. He worked for 3 hours, tracing connections, testing power flows, eliminating possibilities one by one. Lyra watched him in silence, her 3 eyes following his every movement. Finally, Thomas found it. A crystalline component deep in the system had fractured. A hairline crack ran through its structure, disrupting the flow of energy. Here, Thomas said, pointing. This is your problem. Lyra leaned in to look. Her shoulders sagged. That component is irreplaceable. It was grown specifically for this system by Verne bioengineers 200 years ago. Without it, this entire wing will eventually become uninhabitable. Thomas studied the fractured crystal, turning it over in his hands carefully. It was beautiful, even broken. The way light moved through it reminded him of a prism. An idea started forming in his mind. A crazy idea. The kind of idea that probably shouldn't work but might anyway. Give me 2 days, Thomas said. Lyra's crystals dimmed with doubt. 2 days to do what? You cannot repair this. No one can. Maybe not repair. But I might be able to improvise something. I need to try. For the next 2 days, Thomas barely slept. He worked in his shuttle's small workshop, fabricating something that had never existed before. He took copper wiring from his shuttle's backup systems. He used carbon fiber from emergency repair supplies. And he carefully incorporated fragments of the broken crystal, embedding them in the human materials like jewels and a crown. The result was ugly. It looked like something cobbled together by a desperate mechanic with limited supplies, which is exactly what it was. The smooth alien crystal was gone, replaced by a rough hybrid of human and Verne technology held together with welds and hope. Thomas wasn't sure it would work. The two technologies were so different, operating on completely different principles. But sometimes, when you mix different approaches, you got something stronger than either one alone. He installed the hybrid component carefully, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. When he activated the system, there was a moment of terrible silence. Then the console hummed to life. Lights flowed through the crystalline structures again. The air in the chamber shifted, becoming more comfortable, more breathable. It worked. Lyra stood frozen, her 3 eyes wide with shock. She approached the console slowly, running her long fingers over the readings. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You combined human technology with Verne bioengineering. These systems are incompatible. They operate on completely different theoretical frameworks. This should not work." Thomas grinned, feeling a surge of pride he hadn't felt in years. "But it does work. That's the thing about engineering, Miss Lyra. Sometimes the impossible just needs someone stubborn enough to try it anyway." Something changed between them after that day. Lyra stopped avoiding Thomas. She began showing him around the base, explaining the purposes of different sections. She taught him about Verne technology, speaking with passion about her people's achievements. The base wasn't just a building. It was a library, a museum, a memorial to an entire civilization. Thomas repaired things as they went, always asking permission first. A broken lighting system here, a malfunctioning door there. Each repair was small, but together they were bringing the base back to life. Lyra watched him work with something that looked like wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. In the evenings, they would sit together in what Thomas had started thinking of as their shared space. Lyra taught him Verne words, though Thomas's human throat struggled with some of the sounds. He taught her about Earth, about humanity, about the simple pleasure of a good cup of coffee, even though she still found it revolting. One evening they were working side by side on a malfunctioning air recycler. The work was tedious, requiring careful attention to dozens of small components. Thomas's hands were tired, and his chest ached with the familiar pain of his illness. But he was content. Lyra spoke suddenly, her voice soft and sad. My people did not die of natural causes. We were not victims of disease or disaster. We were murdered. Thomas stopped working. He looked at her, waiting. There was a war, Lyra continued. The Confluence War. Many species fought for control of this sector of space. The Vern tried to remain neutral, but neutrality was seen as weakness. Our enemies deployed a biological weapon. It was designed specifically to target Vern biology. Within weeks, billions were dead. Within months, my entire species was extinct. Except you, Thomas said quietly. Except me. I was traveling off-world when it happened. I returned to find everyone gone. My family. My friends. Every single person I had ever known. All gone. Lyra's crystals dimmed until they were almost dark. 200 years I have been alone. 200 years of waking from hibernation, maintaining this memorial, then sleeping again because being awake was too painful. Thomas set down his tools. 200 years alone. That's not surviving, Lyra. That's torture. Someone had to remember. Someone had to keep their memory alive. If I let this place fall apart, if I let the records decay, then my people truly die. As long as I maintain this sanctuary, they still exist in some way. Thomas reached out slowly and placed his weathered human hand on Lyra's crystalline one. It felt cool and smooth like touching polished glass. You're not alone anymore. I'm here. And I'll help you keep their memory alive. Lyra's crystals brightened. It was subtle, just a slight increase in their glow, but Thomas had learned this was how Vern smiled. Thank you, Thomas Webb. That night, lying on his cot, Thomas noticed something strange. The constant pain in his chest was less intense. His breathing came easier. He'd grown so used to the discomfort that its absence felt wrong, almost alarming. He pulled out his medical scanner and ran it over his body. The readings appeared on the small screen. Thomas stared at them, not understanding. He ran the scan again. Then a third time. The numbers didn't change. His tumor, the cancer that had been slowly killing him for months, was smaller. Not gone, but definitely shrinking. It didn't make sense. Thomas lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the alien base around him, and wondered what was happening to his body. Whatever it was, he felt better than he had in a long time. For the first time in months, Thomas thought maybe he wasn't ready to die just yet. Thomas sat in front of his communication terminal, staring at the face of Dr. Rachel Chen on the screen. She was his oncologist back on Earth, the woman who'd given him 6 months to live. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and excitement that Thomas had never seen before. This is impossible, Dr. Chen said, shaking her head as she reviewed the scan results Thomas had sent her. Thomas, your tumor has shrunk by 40%. 40%. In less than 2 months. That doesn't happen with stage 4 lung cancer. That just doesn't happen. Thomas glanced over his shoulder. Lyra stood in the doorway, her tall figure casting long shadows across the floor. She'd been listening to the entire conversation, her 3 eyes fixed on the screen with curiosity. I don't know what to tell you, Doc, Thomas said, turning back to the screen. I feel better. The pain is less. I can breathe easier. Something about this place is helping me. Something about the place? Dr. Chen leaned closer to her camera. Thomas, what exactly is in the atmosphere there? What are you breathing? Thomas looked at Lyra again. She stepped forward into the camera's view, her crystalline skin catching the light. Dr. Chen's eyes went wide. The base's life support system was designed for Vern biology, Lyra explained through her translator. The atmospheric composition includes trace elements that do not exist naturally in human environments. It appears these elements are interacting with Thomas's cancer in unexpected ways. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was seeing and hearing. A living alien. Technology that could cure cancer. The implications were staggering. Thomas, you need to come back to Earth. Immediately. We need to study this. We need to understand how it works. This could revolutionize cancer treatment for billions of people. Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd known this conversation was coming. No. No. Dr. Chen's voice rose. Thomas, this is bigger than you. If we can understand what's healing you, we could save countless lives. I said no. Thomas's voice was firm. I'm staying here. Dr. Chen's expression softened. She'd known Thomas for 2 years, had walked him through the darkest period of his life. She understood him better than most. The effect might stop if you leave the base. If you come back to Earth, even for testing, your cancer might start growing again. Is that it? That's part of it, Thomas admitted. And the other part? Thomas looked at Lyra standing beside him. The other part is that I'm not leaving someone I care about to face the end alone. Dr. Chen was silent. Then she nodded slowly. I understand. But Thomas, please keep sending me data. Everything you can. Even if you won't come back, maybe we can still learn something. I will. I promise. After the call ended, Thomas sat in silence. Lyra approached him slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. You would risk your life to stay here? With me? Thomas turned to look at her. In the weeks they'd spent together, he'd learned to read her expressions. The way her crystals dimmed when she was sad. The way they brightened when she was pleased. Right now, they were pulsing with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Confusion maybe. Or disbelief. You've been alone for 200 years, Lyra? 200 years of waking up to silence. Of maintaining this place with no one to talk to, no one to share your memories with. I'm not leaving you to face more of that alone. But you could live. If you stay, the healing might continue. If you leave, you will die. Thomas smiled. I came here to die anyway, remember? If I get a few extra months because of your atmosphere, that's a gift. And I'd rather spend those months here, helping you, than spend years on Earth in a hospital. Lyra's crystals brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. Thomas was starting to recognize this as the Vern equivalent of being moved to tears. You are strange, Thomas Webb. Very strange. I'll take that as a compliment. Thomas stood, his joints protesting less than they had in months. Besides, this place is still half broken. Someone needs to keep fixing it. But even as he said it, Thomas noticed something that worried him. Lyra's skin, usually a frosted glass color that caught and reflected light beautifully, was dimming. Not the emotional dimming he'd seen before, but something deeper. Something permanent. And her movements, which had always been graceful despite her age, were becoming slower. More labored. Over the next few weeks, Thomas watched Lyra decline. She tried to hide it, tried to keep up their usual routine of repairs and conversations. But Thomas had spent his life working with machines, learning to notice the small signs when something was breaking down. He saw those same signs in Lyra now. One morning, Thomas found her collapsed in the central chamber. She was lying on the floor, her crystalline body barely glowing. For a terrible moment, Thomas thought she was dead. Then her eyes opened, all three of them focusing on him weakly. Lyra. Thomas rushed to her side, his old knees protesting as he knelt. He tried to lift her, but she was surprisingly heavy. Instead, he helped her slide across the floor to a resting platform built into the wall. What happened? Are you hurt? Not hurt, Lyra whispered. Her translator crackled, struggling to process her weak voice. Just tired? So very tired. I'm calling for medical help. There has to be someone who can. No. Lyra's hand reached out, touching his arm. Her fingers felt cooler than usual, like glass that had been left outside on a winter night. My time grows short, Thomas. The natural lifespan of my species reaches its end. I am over 260 years old. For a Vern, that is ancient. No human medicine can help me. No Vern medicine exists anymore. Thomas felt his chest tighten, and this time it wasn't from cancer. There has to be something. Some treatment, some technology in this base. There is nothing. Lyra's voice was gentle but firm. I have lived far longer than I should have, sustained only by hibernation and stubborn will. But even I cannot fight time forever. Thomas sat beside her, holding her cool hand in his warm one. Outside the chamber's windows, the dead moon stretched away into darkness. Inside, two dying beings sat together in silence. Finally, Lyra spoke again. I am content, Thomas. You gave me something I thought I would never have again. Companionship. Friendship. Purpose beyond simply maintaining empty halls. These past months with you have been a gift. Don't talk like that. You're not gone yet. Soon though. Lyra's crystals pulsed faintly. But before I go, there is something you must know. Something I need to show you. She stood slowly, refusing Thomas's help. Together they walked through the corridors, deeper into the base than Thomas had ever gone. The passages here were older, more ornate. The symbols on the walls seemed to tell stories, though Thomas couldn't read them. They reached a massive door that Thomas had never seen before. It was covered in intricate carvings, and it pulsed with a soft inner light. Lyra placed her hand on a panel beside the door. There was a moment of recognition, a scan of some kind. Then the door opened with a sound like singing. Inside was a chamber that took Thomas's breath away. Rows upon rows of crystalline containers lined the walls, each one glowing with soft light. The air itself seemed to hum with potential, with life held in suspension. What is this? Thomas whispered. Lyra walked to the center of the chamber, her movements slow but filled with purpose. Genetic samples, embryos, cultural databases, educational programs, art, music, philosophy. Everything needed to restore my species. Her voice filled with desperate hope. The Vern knew extinction was possible. We were not naive. So we created seed vaults like this one hidden across the galaxy. Each one designed to give our people a second chance on a suitable world. Thomas walked along the rows of containers, his reflection multiplying in their crystalline surfaces. Each one held the potential for life. For an entire civilization to be reborn. This is incredible. It is also useless. Lyra's crystals dimmed to near darkness. I do not have the strength to complete the journey to a suitable world. I cannot terraform a planet alone. I cannot raise an entire species as a single individual. And there are no other Vern left to receive this legacy. Tears fell from Lyra's eyes. Actual tears. Thomas watched in fascination as they crystallized on her cheeks, becoming tiny jewels that caught the light. 200 years I have guarded this vault. 200 years of hope that somehow, impossibly, another Vern might find it. But no one came. No one will come. I will die and this vault will fall into darkness and my people will be truly extinct. Everything they were, everything they could have been will be lost forever. Thomas stood in the chamber, surrounded by the ghosts of a civilization. He thought about Lyra, alone for 2 centuries, keeping watch over a dream that would never come true. He thought about his own species, how humans had spread across the stars, surviving against impossible odds through stubbornness and adaptation. And he made a decision that would change everything. What if humans helped? Thomas said. Lyra's 3 eyes focused on him. What? What if humans helped bring your people back? We're good at impossible projects. We've terraformed moons, we've brought back extinct Earth species, we've built things we had no business building. What if we did it for the Vern too? You would do this? Your species would do this. I can't promise what all of humanity will do. But I can try. I can reach out to the right people. Scientists, xenobiologists, people who dedicate their lives to preserving what's been lost. Thomas walked back to Lyra, taking both her hands in his. Let me try. Please. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then her crystals brightened just a little. Just enough. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Thomas wept. Try. Thomas spent 3 days preparing for the most important conversation of his life. He contacted scientists, xenobiologists, cultural preservation experts, and representatives from organizations he'd barely heard of before. He sent them data about the Vern Vault, about Lyra's story, about what humanity could do if they chose to help. The conference call was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks after Thomas had made his promise to Lyra. 12 organizations agreed to attend. 12 chances to save an entire species. Thomas sat in front of his communication terminal, his hands shaking slightly. Lyra sat beside him in a chair they'd brought from another section of the base. She was weaker now, visibly declining each day. Her crystalline skin had lost most of its glow. Her movements were slow and painful. But her 3 eyes were alert, watching the screen as it filled with faces from across human space. Director William Foster of the Interstellar Heritage Foundation spoke first. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many bureaucratic battles. Mr. Webb, we've reviewed your proposal. I'll be direct. The answer is no. Thomas felt his stomach drop. You didn't even let me explain? We preserve data from extinct species, Foster continued, his voice firm. We maintain their records, their art, their history. We don't play God by resurrecting them. That crosses a line that humanity agreed never to cross after the Titan cloning disaster of 2187. This is different, Thomas argued, finding his voice. This isn't cloning some creature that evolution eliminated. This isn't playing God. The Vern planned for this. They built these vaults specifically so their species could survive extinction. They wanted this. We'd be honoring their wishes, not violating them. A woman's face filled one section of the screen. Dr. Patricia Ross, a xenobiologist from the Mars Research Institute. Mr. Webb, I understand your emotional investment here. But the Vern designed these vaults assuming other Vern would implement them. They never intended humans to oversee the restoration of their species. We don't have the cultural knowledge, the biological understanding, or the moral authority to take on that responsibility. Lyra spoke then, her translator crackling. I can teach him. I can teach all of you. Everything about my people, our biology, our culture, our values. The knowledge doesn't die with me if you allow me to pass it on. Foster shook his head. With all respect, Keeper Lyra, even with your guidance, Mr. Webb is not qualified for this task. He's a retired mechanic, not a scientist. How could he possibly oversee something so complex? Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. The familiar pain was there too, but dulled by the base's atmosphere. You're right. I'm not a scientist. I'm a mechanic. I fix broken things. I fixed broken engines, broken ships, broken lives. And now I'm looking at a broken species, one that can be fixed if we just have the courage to try. Another voice joined the conversation. Professor David Kim from the Xenocultural Studies Department at Luna University. The ethical implications are staggering. If we bring back the Vern, what precedent does that set? Do we bring back every extinct species we find? Do we have that right? Yes, Thomas said simply. When they ask us to. When they've left us instructions. When refusing means letting something beautiful disappear forever just because we're too afraid to act. The debate continued for hours. Thomas argued until his voice was hoarse. Lyra provided information about Vern biology, their social structures, their educational methods. Other voices joined in, some supporting the idea, others firmly against it. The screen became a chaos of overlapping arguments. Finally, Dr. Ross spoke again, silencing the others. Let's say we agree. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Webb? Thomas took a deep breath. I propose that I stay here in this base as guardian. Lyra will teach me everything she can in the time she has left. I'll record it all, thousands of hours of instruction. Then a team of human scientists and engineers will join me. Together we'll begin the process of bringing the Vern back. Slowly, carefully. Starting with just a few individuals, raised with full knowledge of their history and humanity's role in their restoration. And who oversees you? Foster asked. Who ensures you don't make catastrophic mistakes? You do, Thomas said. All of you. The Interstellar Heritage Foundation, the research institutes, the ethics boards. You monitor everything we do. You have veto power over any decision. I'm not asking to do this alone. I'm asking permission to try. You're asking us to trust you with the resurrection of an entire civilization, Professor Kim said. Based on what qualification? Thomas looked at Lyra. She was watching him with an expression he'd come to recognize as pride. Based on the fact that I care. That I've spent the last months learning about the Vern, helping Keeper Lyra maintain their legacy. That I came here to die and instead found something worth living for. His voice grew stronger. I fix broken things. It's what I do. It's all I've ever done. This species is broken. Their last survivor is dying. But they can be saved if we act now. So let me fix this. Please. Silence filled the communication channel. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Lyra's cool hand touching his shoulder in support. Dr. Ross spoke finally. I want to see the vault. I want full access to all the genetic data. And I want daily reports on every aspect of the project. You'll have it, Thomas promised. I'll need to brief my team at the Heritage Foundation, Foster said slowly. This would be unprecedented. But perhaps that's not a reason to say no. One by one the representatives began agreeing. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. But they agreed. The Vern would get their second chance. Humanity would help give it to them. After the call ended, Thomas sat in exhausted silence. Lyra's hand was still on his shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. We did it, Thomas corrected. This is your legacy, Lyra. I'm just the keeper. Over the following weeks, Lyra taught Thomas everything she could. They recorded thousands of hours of instruction. She showed him Vern art, explained their philosophy, taught him their child-rearing practices. She gave him access to the base's vast cultural database, walking him through centuries of accumulated knowledge. She grew weaker each day. Sometimes she would fall asleep mid-sentence, exhausted by the effort of speaking. But she never complained. She seemed driven by a purpose that went beyond mere survival. On what Thomas knew would be Lyra's last day, they sat together in the central chamber. Lyra had requested this location specifically. She activated a holographic system Thomas hadn't known existed. Images filled the air around them. A world with purple skies. Cities built from crystal that sang in the wind. Children with glowing skin playing in gardens filled with bioluminescent plants. Adults working together on projects that defied human understanding. Music that seemed to come from the air itself. This was my home, Lyra said, her voice barely audible. This was what we were. Thomas watched the images, tears streaming down his face. They'll know this. The new Vern. They'll know their history, their beauty, their achievements. Will they also know that a human saved them? Lyra asked. That species who were once enemies became family? They'll know, Thomas promised. They'll know that at the end of everything, when your species faced true extinction, a human mechanic refused to let that happen. They'll know that you trusted us with your most precious gift. Lyra's crystals were almost completely dark now. She reached out with both hands and Thomas took them gently. Thomas Webb, you came to my home to die, to find peace in silence. Instead, you gave my entire people life. You gave them a future. Her voice cracked. Your heart is the most human thing I have ever known. Stubborn, determined, impossibly kind. I'm just a mechanic, Thomas said through tears. Just fixing what's broken. No. Lyra's voice was fading to a whisper. You're more. You're a keeper now. Keeper Thomas. The bridge between what was and what will be. Guard them well. Teach them compassion as you showed me. Teach them that different species can choose understanding over fear. I will. I promise. Then I can rest. Lyra's 3 eyes closed slowly, one after another. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for these final months. Thank you for not letting me die alone. Thank you for refusing to let my people end. Her crystals went completely dark. The glow that had defined her, that had made her Vern, faded like a candle burning out. Thomas held her hands as they grew cold and still. The last true Vern was gone. Thomas sat in the dark chamber, surrounded by holographic images of a lost world, holding the hands of his dead friend. He cried until he had no tears left. Then he stood, gently arranged Lyra's body on the resting platform and walked to the vault. Inside, the crystalline chambers still glowed. Life waiting to begin. A species ready to be reborn. Thomas placed his hand on the wall, feeling the hum of preserved potential beneath his fingers. I'll keep my promise, Lyra, he said to the empty chamber. I'll fix this. I'll bring them back. And they'll know you. They'll know what you sacrificed, how long you waited, how much you hoped. Behind him, the base hummed its agreement. Keeper Thomas, the humans would call him. The title Lyra had given him in her final moment. A retired mechanic who came to an alien moon to die. Who instead learned to live again. Who refused to let a species end. Who proved that sometimes the most human thing you can do is care about something beyond yourself. Outside, the dead moon turned in space. Inside, Thomas got to work. There was much to prepare. The first team of scientists would arrive in 3 months. The first Vern embryo would be awakened in a year. A species had died. Now it would live again. And it would all start with a stubborn old man who knew how to fix broken things.